So for a very long time, Japan has actually been on the bucket list of many business owners, entrepreneurs, or just people who want to work for their companies, but from a different part of the world. But Japan's strict immigration policies and very restrictive visa options have kept these dreams out of reach for many of us. But now times are changing, and the possibility of you coming to work and live in Japan is about to become a reality. Or is it? If you want to know the answer, make sure you watch this video very carefully until the end to find out if you can or should become a digital nomad in Japan. Now, earlier this year, just a few months ago, the government in Japan launched its newest visa, the Digital Nomad Visa, and that makes it one of the latest countries in Asia to do so, after Malaysia, the Philippines, and South Korea. And so today I would like to cover whether this visa is actually a good decision for you, and if so, how you can apply for it. But to start with, many people actually believe that this visa falls a little bit short of expectations, so let's explore that a little bit. First of all, this visa only allows you to stay in Japan for a maximum of 6 months as a digital nomad, and on top of that, there's no possibility of extending your stay. This means that once your visa has expired, they will not be renewing it anymore. And if you compare that with other countries like Malaysia and the Philippines, for example, which allow you to stay for 1 year and then extend it for 1 more year after that, or even South Korea, which allows you to stay for 2 years and then extend that for a 3rd year after that, then yes, it seems Japan might be falling a little bit short. But not only for that reason, there's one more very important condition that I think you should take into consideration when you apply. But first, let's talk about what the requirements actually are. Now, your first requirement is actually making sure that you're a citizen of one of the eligible countries, because after all, it seems not all countries were created equal, and so you have to make sure that your country is in this list right here. Now, you can see the list is actually quite extensive, but not every country is included. If you'd like to learn more about this, I'll leave the link in the section below this video as well. But basically, the reason for this is that certain countries have a double taxation agreement with Japan, and so if you'd like to apply for a digital nomad visa, you have to make sure that your country has that kind of agreement in the first place. Now, on top of that, of course, you have to have a valid passport, a passport with at least 6 months of validity, and that's because that's going to be the maximum period of stay in this country for you. After that, you have to provide documentation describing what your activities are going to be while you're staying in this country. Basically, what kind of work you're going to be doing while you're here in Japan. And the reason for this is that in other cases, like the work visa, for example, if you're an engineer, you cannot earn other types of income that are not related to what your visa was approved for, engineer work. So in the case of your digital nomad visa, the same applies. If you're working for a particular company that's outside of Japan, then you can only earn income through that company, legally of course, unless you ask for certain government permissions. But in principle, you need to provide a description of what all your activities are going to be while you're staying in Japan. And now, as for the financial requirements, which is the other important point that I mentioned earlier, you have to prove that you're earning at least 10 million yen in annual income. And as of the time of making this video, that's going to be about $70,000. And that's a considerable amount of money for many of us, especially if you compare it with other countries like the Philippines and Malaysia, once again, which have a much lower bar. For them, it's going to be about $25,000 a year. And lastly, which I think it's likely one of the most important requirements of all, is that you need to be working for a non-Japanese company that's registered outside of Japan. So it seems that if you want to become a digital nomad in Japan, you cannot be working for a Japanese company at all. But in any case, if you cover all these basic requirements, in theory, you can apply for your visa. But now let's talk about what the benefits of this visa could actually be. Now, for example, one of the first benefits is that if you're married, then you can also bring your spouse with you under the digital nomad visa. The same goes for your children if you have any. Now, as you might know, this is not the same for any type of visa, because in certain cases, if you come with a work visa, for example, they will also need to apply for a spouse visa respectively. But that doesn't apply for the digital nomad visa, as they will all fall under the umbrella of your visa as well. Now, another good side is that if you've always been interested in Japan, its culture, its food, its way of life and so on, then actually coming here as a digital nomad might be a very good opportunity to continue exploring that further. Because as a digital nomad, of course, you'll be able to manage your time a little bit differently, and so you can basically work from wherever you want. If you'd like to work from the top of Mount Fuji, you can do that, or if you'd like to go to Hokkaido in the summer and Okinawa during the winter, you can go ahead and do that as well. Now, another plus side is that given the role that Japan currently has in the world of tech and green technologies and things like that, coming and working here could also be a very good opportunity for you and your career, depending on your field of work, of course. Now, as a very important note, when you come to Japan as a digital nomad, you're actually technically not a Japanese resident. You will not be a resident of Japan. And this means that you will also not be subject to paying the taxes that a normal Japanese resident would have to pay. That's why you have to make sure that you're actually a citizen from a country that has a double taxation agreement with Japan. So just to make this clear, the Japan Digital Nomad Visa does not make you a taxpayer. But also keep in mind that this is still a fairly new visa, so it's likely that some of these conditions and requirements might change with further revisions and versions of the visa. But now let's talk about the documents that you'll actually need. Now, obtaining your digital nomad visa in Japan requires a few key documents that you need to have on hand. So here's what you're actually going to need. First of all, of course, you need to submit your visa application with a recent photo of you. Generally, they ask that this photo be no older than 6 months, so keep that in mind. After that, of course, you need to have your valid passport, like I mentioned earlier, and also the famous Certificate of Eligibility, or COE. This is a document that actually tells the government that you are eligible to apply for your visa and come and work and live in this country. Now, if you'd like to learn more about what this document actually is and how to get it and what you need to do to get it, then make sure you go and watch this video right here. I'll also leave the link in the section below this video. Now, as well as I mentioned earlier, you need to hand in a document that describes what your activities are going to be while you live here in Japan, describing exactly what your work is going to be. And as another financial requirement, other than the 10 million yen in annual income that I mentioned earlier, you're also going to have to give proof of financial stability. This means actually providing your tax returns, your proof of income, your bank statements, and so on. And generally for these documents, like tax returns, for example, they tend to ask for the last 3 years. So make sure to keep that in mind as well when it's time to apply for your visa. Now, as another very important note, keep in mind that the digital nomad visa does not provide any form of health insurance. And because, like I mentioned earlier, you're actually not a Japanese resident, you also cannot apply for general health insurance in the country. So you have to make sure that you bring proof of international health insurance, not only for yourself, but also for your spouse and your children if you're coming with them. And once again, if you have any spouse or children, then you also have to make sure that you hand in any birth certificates and any marriage certificates as well. Now, the actual application process is fairly straightforward and it doesn't take that long, surprisingly. Now, the first thing you need to do is actually contact your local embassy or your local consulate and make an appointment for your application. And additionally, they'll also be able to give you all the latest information, the latest condition and the latest requirements for your visa. Because remember, this is still a fairly new visa, so it's likely that some of these conditions might be changing from time to time. And so of course they'll be able to provide you with the latest information. And once you submit it, then all you have to do is wait for your application to be approved. And according to some of my sources, this can actually take about 5 days to a week, granted that you have all your documents, including the Certificate of Eligibility, in order. So I think these are really the most important and the most essential points you need to know about the digital nomad visa in Japan. Does it stand up to your expectations? What do you think? Let me know down in the comments, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And as always, if you'd like to know more about life in Japan as an entrepreneur, then make sure you watch this video right here. So don't miss it, and I'll see you next time.